90 days ago, I filed a labeling complaint with the FDA against my sister-in-law's bakery. She had copied my trademarked storefront, stolen my recipes, and built her whole business on a carbon copy of mine. This morning, I got a call from a federal inspector. He wanted to know if I could confirm the allergen declarations on her packaging were falsified. I said yes, I could, because I had tested every batch she sold. My name is Claire. I run a small bakery in Portland called Flour and Stone. 6 years of building a name, trademarking our logo, and perfecting recipes that became the reason people drove across town on Sunday mornings. Then my brother's wife opened a bakery exactly 4 miles away. Same pastel signage, same menu layout, same 6 signature recipes I had spent years developing. She even used the same font. And when I asked her to stop, she laughed and said recipes can't be owned. That was 90 days ago. Now the FDA is at her door because of a labeling complaint I filed. The question everyone wants answered is simple. Did I do it to protect my business or to destroy hers? The answer is both. But the story of how I got here starts long before the FDA ever picked up the phone. I opened Flour and Stone in March of 2018 on a side street in southeast Portland. I had saved for 3 years, sleeping on a friend's couch, working 2 catering jobs, and testing every single recipe at least 40 times before I let anyone taste it. The first 6 months, I barely broke even, but I was obsessed with getting every detail right. The lighting, the music, the way the butter felt when it came to room temperature. I trademarked the name Flour and Stone in July of 2019, after a lawyer told me that if I ever wanted to expand or protect the brand, I needed to lock it down. I registered the logo and the tagline, but the recipes I kept as trade secrets, handwritten in a notebook that never left the back office. Every baker who worked for me signed a non-disclosure agreement. I know that sounds paranoid. But I had watched too many small bakeries get gutted by copycats who waited just long enough for the original to prove the concept before swooping in. My brother Daniel and I grew up in a kitchen. Our mother baked professionally, and we both learned the business from the ground up. Daniel was always the charming one, the person who could sell anything to anyone, but he never had the patience for the actual work. He wanted the front of house, the handshake, the spotlight. When I told him I was opening my own bakery, he seemed genuinely happy for me. He came to the opening, brought a bottle of champagne, told me I was going to crush it. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. He was my brother. Then he married Jenna in 2021. Jenna worked in corporate marketing and had strong opinions about everything. She complimented my bakery at the wedding reception, said she loved the branding, asked a lot of questions about how I sourced my ingredients. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just glad she was being friendly. But looking back, I should have noticed how carefully she watched every move I made in the kitchen during family dinners. Fast forward to February of 2023. I was at a farmer's market booth when a regular customer mentioned she had just tried a new bakery called Flourish on Hawthorne. She said the pastries tasted almost identical to mine. I laughed it off at first. Portland has 100 bakeries doing similar things, but she insisted. Same hazelnut cardamom bunt with the same candied orange glaze, same lavender shortbread with edible flowers, even the same sourdough loaf labeled rustic boule. I drove there that afternoon. I stood across the street for 5 minutes before I walked in. The storefront was whitewashed with a pastel pink sign that read Flourish in a script font that was close enough to mine to be intentional, but just different enough to avoid a direct trademark challenge. The menu board had the same categories, same layout, same pricing structure. And when I saw my brother behind the counter in an apron, my stomach dropped. He looked up, saw me, and smiled. Not an embarrassed smile, a proud one. He said surprise like this was a birthday party. He said Jenna had been planning it for a year. She had visited my bakery as a customer at least a dozen times, taken notes, photographed the display cases, and even bought one of my cookbooks at a charity auction where I had demonstrated a recipe. She had then reverse-engineered my 6 bestsellers using trial and error. And because she had never signed an NDA or worked in my kitchen, she believed there was nothing I could do about it legally. I tried to stay calm. I asked Daniel why he would do this to his own sister. He told me it wasn't personal. It was business. He said Portland had room for more than one bakery in that style, and that Jenna deserved a chance to build something of her own. I said, She could have built something of her own without copying mine. He shrugged and said, maybe, but this was faster. That week, I hired an intellectual property attorney. She reviewed my trademark registrations, my trade secret protections, and the evidence of copying. The news was not good. My trademark covered the name Flower and Stone and the logo. It did not cover the recipes. Trade secret law could help if I could prove Jenna had stolen the recipes through improper means, like stealing my notebook or hacking my files. But reverse engineering from a finished product is legal. She had not broken into my kitchen. She had simply tasted and replicated. The attorney told me I could try to sue for unfair competition, but the case would be expensive, uncertain, and Jenna could counterclaim that I was trying to bully a new business out of the market. I felt sick. I had spent 6 years building something from nothing, and someone who had never measured a cup of flour in her life had just copied it in 4 months and called it her own. The worst part was that customers started going to Flourish because it was cheaper. Jenna undercut my prices by 30%, using lower quality ingredients and mass-produced mixes for some items, but the public could not tell the difference at first. And several online reviews started comparing the two bakeries, saying Flourish was just as good for less money. My sales dropped 40% in 2 months. That is when I started digging. I began visiting Flourish weekly as a customer. I bought samples, took them home, and tested them. Not for taste, for compliance. I checked the ingredient labels on every packaged item she sold. I knew the food labeling laws from my own certification process. Every bakery that sells packaged goods must include a complete ingredient list, allergen declarations, and accurate net weight. And if a product contains a major allergen like tree nuts, dairy, or eggs, it must be declared clearly. By my 3rd visit, I had found something. Jenna's gluten-free line was labeled as made in a facility that processes tree nuts. But when I tested one of her almond cookies with my own ingredient analysis kit, I discovered she was actually using almond flour as a main ingredient. The cookie was not just processed in a facility with tree nuts. It contained tree nuts. And yet the ingredient list did not list almonds. It listed grain blend and natural flavor. That was a misbranding violation under FDA regulations. And misbranding with a known allergen is a serious enforcement priority. I spent 3 weeks documenting everything. I took photographs of the labels. I preserved the samples. I checked the FDA's guidelines for how to submit a consumer complaint. I did not file it immediately. I waited. I wanted proof that Jenna knew what she was doing. So I hired a private investigator to watch Flourish's supply deliveries. He confirmed that she was receiving 50-pound bags of almond flour from a distributor, even though her labels did not list almonds. That was enough. On a Tuesday morning in October, I submitted a detailed complaint through the FDA's online portal. I attached photographs, test results, and the distributor invoice. I expected a long wait. The FDA receives thousands of complaints a year. But 3 weeks later, I got a call from an investigator in the Seattle district office. He said they had flagged the complaint because of the allergen issue. He asked if I could provide additional evidence. I said I could. I sent him a certified lab report that confirmed almond DNA in the cookie samples. And then I waited. 2 months passed. I started to think nothing would happen. My sales were still down. Daniel and Jenna kept posting photos of their storefront, smiling, laughing, acting like they had won. I was starting to lose hope. But then, 90 days after I filed the complaint, my phone rang at 7:14 in the morning. The caller ID showed a 206 area code. It was the FDA investigator. He said they had sent a warning letter to Flourish 2 weeks earlier, but Jenna had not responded. So now they were initiating an unannounced inspection. He wanted to know if I could be present to point out the specific products in question. I said yes. I drove to Flourish that same morning, parked across the street, and watched the inspector walk in with a clipboard. That is when everything started to move very fast. I watched the inspector push open the glass door of Flourish at 8:03 in the morning. He was in his early 50s, wore a blue polo shirt with an FDA badge clipped to the belt, and carried a leather satchel. Jenna met him at the counter with a practiced smile. She had no idea I was sitting in my car 50 feet away with a camera on my lap. I had debated whether to go inside. But the investigator had asked me to stay nearby in case he needed to identify specific product codes. So I waited. 20 minutes passed. 30. Then the front door swung open and Jenna walked out with her phone pressed to her ear. Her face was pale. She was not smiling anymore. She saw my car and stopped mid-step. For a long second, we just looked at each other through the windshield. Then she walked over and tapped on my window. I rolled it down. She said, "You did this." I said, "I filed a complaint about the labeling. The inspector found what he needed on his own." She said, "You ruined my business." I said, "You copied my recipes." She said, "That's not illegal." I said, "Mislabeling allergens is." She walked back inside and slammed the door. That was the first time I saw real fear in her eyes, and honestly, it felt good. For about 10 seconds. Then my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. He said, "Claire, what the hell are you doing?" I told him exactly what I had done. He said, "She's my wife." I said, "And I'm your sister." He said, "This is not how family treats family." I laughed at that. I could not help it. I said, "You mean the way you stole my business and called it faster?" He hung up. The inspector came out 40 minutes later with 3 boxes of packaged goods. He explained to me that he had documented 6 different products with labeling violations. The almond cookies were the most serious because they contained a declared allergen that was not listed. But he also found that her gluten-free bread contained wheat starch, which she had labeled as modified food starch without specifying the source. That is another violation. And her net weight declarations were off by up to 15% on several items. He said the warning letter had been sent 2 weeks earlier. Since Jenna had not responded or corrected the labels, they were now initiating a formal enforcement process. That could mean a seizure order, a recall, or a referral for civil penalties. He said she would have 30 days to come into compliance or face escalating action. I went home that afternoon feeling like I had won a battle, but I had not won the war. The next morning, I received a certified letter from a law firm representing Jenna and Daniel. They were threatening to sue me for defamation, tortious interference with business relations, and malicious prosecution. They demanded that I retract the FDA complaint publicly and pay their legal fees. The letter was signed by a lawyer who specialized in food industry disputes. It was aggressive. It was designed to scare me. And it worked for about 2 hours. Then I called my attorney. She read the letter and told me it was mostly noise. Defamation requires a false statement. My complaint to the FDA was based on verified lab results. Tortious interference requires improper conduct. Filing a regulatory complaint in good faith is not improper. Malicious prosecution requires that the underlying action lack probable cause. The FDA had already found violations. There was probable cause. But she warned me that the litigation threat itself could be used to drain my resources. Even a weak lawsuit costs tens of thousands of dollars to defend. And Jenna knew that. She was betting I would back down rather than bleed. I did not back down, but I also realized I needed more than a labeling complaint. I needed to understand who I was dealing with. That is when I hired a private investigator full-time, not just to watch supply deliveries, to dig into Jenna's past. The investigator's name was Marcus. He had 20 years in law enforcement before starting his own firm. I gave him everything I knew about Jenna, her maiden name, her previous employer, the city she lived in before Portland. He started with public records. What he found in the first week changed everything. Jenna had owned a bakery before, in Spokane, Washington. It was called Sweet Petal. She opened it in 2019 and closed it in 2021 after a series of complaints, not from competitors, from customers. Multiple people had reported that her products made them sick. One person filed a formal complaint with the Spokane County Health Department after a severe allergic reaction. The health department investigated and found that she had been substituting cheaper ingredients without updating her labels. She had listed almond extract, but used artificial flavoring. She had labeled items as gluten-free that contained trace amounts of wheat. The health department issued a citation and a fine, but the records were sealed as part of a settlement, so it never appeared on standard background checks. When I read that report, I felt a cold wash of recognition. This was not a woman who made a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. She had done the same thing in Spokane. She had copied a local bakery there too. The owner had confronted her, but by the time the legal process moved, Jenna had already closed Sweet Petal and moved to Portland. She did not just steal my recipes. She stole a playbook, and she had been running it for years. Marcus also found something else. A civil lawsuit from 2020. A former business partner in Spokane had sued Jenna for breach of contract. The partner claimed Jenna had taken the business's proprietary recipes and customer lists after a falling out. The case was settled out of court with a confidentiality clause, but Marcus found the docket number and a summary of the allegations. I now had evidence of a documented history of intellectual property theft and regulatory violations. This was not a family squabble. This was a serial operator. I took this information to my attorney. She said it was powerful for two reasons. First, it undermined any claim that Jenna was an innocent new business owner. Second, it could be used to support a motion for expedited discovery if Jenna actually filed a lawsuit. But she also cautioned that the sealed records and confidential settlement meant I could not use them directly in court without a judge's order. I needed a different approach. Meanwhile, the FDA enforcement was moving forward. The Seattle District Office issued a public notification about Flourish's labeling violations. That notification went out to industry databases and consumer alert systems. Local food bloggers picked it up. One of them wrote a post titled, "Portland Bakery Caught Mislabeling Allergens." The post included a screenshot of the FDA notification and mentioned that the complaint had been filed by a competitor. The comments section exploded. Some people defended Jenna, saying it was a witch hunt. Others thanked me for exposing a safety risk. A few accused me of being a bitter loser who could not handle competition. But the damage to Flourish was real. Sales dropped. Catering orders canceled. Jenna posted a defensive video on Instagram saying she was being targeted by a jealous relative. She cried on camera. She said she had never intentionally harmed anyone. She said the labeling issues were minor paperwork errors. Daniel called me again. He said I was destroying their lives. He said Jenna was having panic attacks. He said their marriage was falling apart. I told him I was sorry she was suffering, but I asked him one question. Did you know about Spokane? There was a long silence. Then he said, "That's not fair." I said, "You knew." He said, "She told me about some legal trouble, but she said it was a vindictive ex-partner. She said she was the victim." I said, "She lied to you, Daniel, just like she lied on her labels." He did not answer. He just hung up again. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the notebook. The one with my original recipes, handwritten, locked in my office filing cabinet. I had assumed it was safe, but Marcus had asked me if anyone else had access to my bakery. I said my employees, but they all signed NDAs. Then I remembered something. Daniel had visited my bakery in December of 2022, about 2 months before Flourish opened. He had come by to drop off a Christmas gift. I had been in the middle of a rush, so I told him to put the gift on my desk in the back office. He was back there alone for maybe 5 minutes. I called Marcus the next morning. I asked him if he could check something for me. He reviewed the security footage from my own cameras. I had not thought to look at it before because I trusted Daniel, but the footage from that day showed him entering my office, looking around, and then walking directly to my filing cabinet. He tried the handle. It was locked. He stood there for a moment, then pulled out his phone and took a photograph of something. The angle suggested he was photographing the cabinet, possibly the lock type or the keypad. I had not been storing my recipe notebook in that cabinet at the time. I kept it in a locked drawer in my desk, but I had stored a backup copy in the filing cabinet, a binder with printed versions of all my recipes, including the original development notes. He must have photographed the binder, and then used that to help Jenna replicate the formulas. That was trade secret theft, not reverse engineering, actual theft. I had the video, I had the timeline, and now I had a decision to make. I could take this evidence to the FBI. Trade secret theft that affects interstate commerce is a federal crime under the Economic Espionage Act. Penalties include up to 10 years in prison and fines of up to $500,000 for individuals. I could send my own brother to federal prison. Or I could use it as leverage. I could demand that Flourish close permanently, that Jenna and Daniel sign a public acknowledgement of what they did, and that they never open a bakery in the state of Oregon again. I sat in my kitchen at midnight, staring at the freeze frame of Daniel's hand reaching toward my filing cabinet. Max, the dog, was asleep at my feet. Alex was upstairs, already in bed. I had spent months trying to protect my business. I had won the FDA fight. I had exposed a serial copycat. But I had also discovered that the person I trusted most in my family had helped her do it. And now, I had to decide whether to use the nuclear option. That is when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It said, "I know what you have. Let's talk before you do something we both regret." It was Jenna. I agreed to meet Jenna at a coffee shop near the waterfront. Neutral ground. She arrived 10 minutes late, wearing sunglasses indoors, and sat down across from me without ordering anything. She looked smaller than I remembered, less confident, but her voice was steady when she spoke. She said, "I know you have the security footage of Daniel at your filing cabinet, and I know you're thinking about going to the FBI." I said nothing. She said, "Before you do, you should know something. Those recipes you think are yours, they're not. They're your mother's. Daniel found the original recipe box in your parents' attic after they passed. Your mother wrote them by hand in the 1990s when she was baking professionally. You adapted them, sure, but the base formulas were never yours alone. They were family property." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had never seen my mother's recipe box. She died when I was 22, and Daniel handled the estate. He never mentioned a box of recipes. I had assumed she didn't leave anything behind. Jenna slid a photograph across the table. It showed a worn wooden box with handwritten index cards inside. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. The cards were labeled with the same names I used: hazelnut cardamom bunt, lavender shortbread, rustic boule. The recipes were dated 1994, years before I ever opened a bakery. Jenna said, "Daniel showed me this after we got married. He told me you had built a business on our mother's work. He said you never asked for permission. You just took what you remembered and called it original. So when I decided to open Flourish, I asked him for copies. He gave them to me willingly. That's not theft. That's family sharing what should have been shared all along." My hands were shaking. I wanted to argue, but I remembered something. My mother had taught me to bake when I was a child. She had shown me how to make the bunt, the shortbread, the boule. I had assumed those were her own creations. But what if she had borrowed them from somewhere else? Or what if she and I had developed them together and she had written them down after I left home? I could not prove anything. Jenna continued, "You can go to the FBI with your video of Daniel looking at a cabinet, but I will counter with evidence that the recipes were not trade secrets. They were common family knowledge, written down and stored in an attic for 20 years. You never registered them as trade secrets. You never filed any formal protection beyond your trademark. And if you try to destroy my business for labeling errors, I will file a lawsuit claiming you defamed me by calling the recipes stolen. And I have a witness. Daniel will testify that the recipes were our mother's." She stood up. "Think about it, Claire. You can still back out. Retract the FDA complaint. Apologize publicly. I'll let you keep your bakery. Or we can drag this through court for the next 3 years and let the public decide who the real thief is." She walked out. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photograph of the recipe box. That night, I called Marcus. I told him what Jenna had shown me. He said, "She's bluffing, partially. Even if the recipes were your mother's, you built the business. You trademarked the brand. You created the modern versions. The labeling violations are separate. The FDA doesn't care about family recipe disputes." But I could not shake the feeling that I had lost the moral high ground. I had built my identity around being the victim of theft. Now I was being cast as someone who had taken something that was never solely mine. Then Marcus said something that stopped me cold. I ran a deeper check on Jenna's identity today. Her maiden name is not what she told Daniel. Her real name is Jennifer Kovacs. She changed it legally in 2017 after a federal investigation into a catering business she ran in Seattle. The investigation was for food fraud and operating without a license. She was never charged, but the case file mentions that she used at least 3 different aliases to open businesses across Washington and Oregon. He paused. She's not just a copycat baker. She's a serial fraudster who has been running this playbook for almost a decade, and she's married your brother to get access to your family's recipes. I felt sick, but also alive with a new kind of clarity. This was no longer about sibling rivalry or small business competition. This was about someone who had systematically exploited people, stolen identities, and manipulated her way into my family. Daniel was not just a co-conspirator, he was a victim too. The next morning, I received a letter from the FDA. They had completed their inspection report on Flourish and were referring the case to the Department of Justice for potential criminal prosecution. The letter stated that the misbranding was considered intentional and egregious, given the allergen risks. They had also discovered that Jenna had been purchasing unapproved food additives from an overseas supplier. That triggered a separate investigation for adulteration. But there was a catch. The FDA investigator told me that they had also received a counter-complaint against my bakery, Flour and Stone. The complaint alleged that my gluten-free products contained trace amounts of wheat, even though I labeled them as certified gluten-free. I knew it was false. I had my products tested quarterly by an independent lab, but the complaint forced the FDA to open a parallel review of my operations. The inspection would happen within the next 30 days. I knew who filed it, Jenna. She had turned my own weapon against me. Even a baseless complaint could disrupt my business, trigger a recall, and cost me thousands in legal fees. And if the inspection found even a minor labeling error in my bakery, I would lose the credibility I had built as the righteous accuser. I called my attorney again. She said the counter-complaint was likely retaliatory, but proving retaliation is difficult. She advised me to cooperate fully with the FDA and to prepare for the inspection. She also said that if I wanted to pursue the trade secret angle, I needed to act fast. The video of Daniel at the cabinet was time-stamped from December 2022. The statute of limitations for trade secret theft under the Economic Espionage Act is 5 years. But the longer I waited, the harder it would be to prove damages. That is when I made a decision that surprised even myself. I called Daniel. I asked him to meet me at our mother's grave. He agreed. We stood in the cold rain at the cemetery, staring at a headstone that said Margaret Caldwell, beloved mother and baker. I had not been there since the funeral. I said, "Did you take Mom's recipe box?" He looked at the ground. "Yes." "Did you give it to Jenna?" She asked. I thought it was fair. You had used the recipes for years without telling anyone. They were mine too, Daniel. Mom taught me, she taught both of us, but I did the work. I wrote them down in my own words. I developed the techniques. I built a business. He shrugged. You built it on her foundation. I figured Jenna deserved a foundation too. I told him about Jenna's real identity, about Seattle, about the aliases. His face went pale. He said, "You're lying." I showed him the documents Marcus had found, the federal case file summaries, the name change records, the previous complaints. He read them in silence. Then he sat down on the wet grass, not caring about his suit. He put his head in his hands and said, "Oh my God." I knelt beside him. She married you to get access to our family, Daniel, not to build a life with you, to build a business. He started to cry. I held him for the first time in years. And in that moment, I realized that the line between victim and perpetrator was not as clean as I had believed. He was as deceived as I was, but he had also chosen to betray me. I told him what I was going to do. I was going to take all the evidence to the FBI, the FDA, and the local news. I was going to expose everything. And if he wanted to salvage anything, he would need to testify against his own wife. He said he would. That was the turning point. I had gone from a small business owner protecting her turf to a central witness in a federal investigation that reached across 3 states. And the person I trusted to stand beside me was the same person who had helped tear me down. The next week moved fast. The FBI opened a preliminary inquiry. The FDA expanded their investigation to include Jenna's other businesses. The local news ran a story titled, "Brother's Wife, Serial Fraudster, Portland Bakery Dispute Takes Federal Turn." Jenna went silent. She closed Flourish. She stopped returning calls. Daniel moved out of their apartment and into a hotel. He said he was scared. And then, 2 weeks after the grave conversation, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. It was a reporter from the Oregonian. She told me that Jenna had been arrested at the Portland airport trying to board a flight to Cancun with a one-way ticket and a suitcase full of cash. The FBI had taken her into custody on charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and trade secret misappropriation. Daniel was not with her. He had kept his promise. I drove to the federal courthouse the next day to watch the arraignment. Jenna stood in handcuffs wearing a gray jumpsuit. She looked at me from across the room. No smile, no tears, just a long, cold stare. I stared back, and I did not flinch. The war was over, but the aftermath was just beginning, and it would demand things from me I had not yet prepared to give. The arraignment lasted 11 minutes. Jenna pleaded not guilty. The judge set bail at $250,000, which she could not pay. She remained in custody. I sat in the third row and watched her lawyer argue that she was not a flight risk, even though she had been caught at the airport with a one-way ticket and cash. The prosecutor pointed out that she had used 3 aliases in the past decade and had no fixed address after closing Flourish. The judge agreed. She was remanded without bail. Over the next 3 months, the federal case moved steadily. Jenna's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had seized her laptop, phone, and financial records. They found spreadsheets tracking every business she had copied, every recipe she had stolen, and every alias she had used. They found email correspondence with a supplier in China who was sending unapproved food additives under fake labels. They found a folder labeled Fallback Identities with forged documents for 4 different names. In March, Jenna accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud, 1 count of identity theft, and 1 count of trade secret misappropriation. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for June. In exchange, the government dropped the food adulteration charges and agreed to recommend a sentence of 5 to 7 years. The judge was not bound by that recommendation. Daniel testified at the sentencing hearing. He spoke about how Jenna had manipulated him, lied about her past, and used his trust to gain access to our mother's recipes. He said he had been ashamed and complicit, but he had not known the full extent of her crimes. He asked the judge for leniency, not for her, but for himself. He was not charged with any crime because the prosecutor determined he had been deceived. I also testified. I described the impact on my business, my family, and my sense of safety. I said that I had built flour and stone from nothing, that I had trusted my brother, and that Jenna had exploited that trust. I asked the judge to send a message that food fraud and identity theft would not be tolerated. The judge listened. Then she sentenced Jenna to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She also ordered restitution of $120,000 to me and $40,000 to the previous victim in Spokane. Jenna was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. She did not look at me. She looked at Daniel, who was sitting in the front row. She said one word, "Traitor!" Then she was gone. I walked out of the courthouse into bright June sunlight. Daniel was waiting on the steps. He looked older, broken. He asked if we could talk. We sat on a bench near the courthouse fountain. He apologized. Not for the first time, but this time it felt different. He said he had spent months in therapy. He said he understood now that he had been jealous of me for years, jealous that I had built something real, while he had drifted from job to job. He said Jenna had recognized that jealousy and used it. I told him I was not ready to forgive him, but I was willing to try slowly. He said he would wait. He had nowhere else to go. Then he handed me something, a small wooden box. our mother's recipe box. He said he had taken it from their attic after Jenna's arrest. He said there was something inside I needed to see. I opened it. Inside were the handwritten index cards, exactly as Jenna had described. But tucked beneath them was a letter, addressed to me, in our mother's handwriting, dated 2 months before she died. I read it on that bench with Daniel sitting beside me. The letter said that our mother knew she was dying. She said she had watched me struggle to find my path. She said she had always believed I had the most talent in the family. And then she wrote something that made me cry in public for the first time in years. She said, "I left the recipe box to Daniel, but I left the knowledge to you. The recipes are just ingredients. The skill is yours. I hope one day you both understand that what I gave you was not the same thing." I closed the box. Daniel was crying too. He said, she knew what I would do. I said, she knew what we would both do, and she loved us anyway. That letter changed something in me. Not everything, but enough. The FDA inspection of my own bakery came 2 weeks later. I cooperated fully. The inspector spent 6 hours going through my kitchen, my labels, my storage. At the end, he found a single violation. One of my ingredient labels for a seasonal pumpkin loaf listed spices without specifying that it contained cinnamon. Cinnamon is not a major allergen, but the labeling guidelines require disclosure of all ingredients. I had overlooked it. I received a warning letter. I corrected the label within a week. The matter was closed, but it was a reminder that no business is perfect and that using regulatory power as a weapon carries risk. I had won the war, but I had also exposed my own flank. Flourish remained closed. Their storefront was still empty, with a faded sign and a pile of unpaid rent notices taped to the door. I drove past it sometimes, not out of spite, but out of disbelief that something so small could have grown into something so destructive. In July, I received the first restitution payment, $120,000 to be paid over 10 years. I donated the first check to a local food safety nonprofit that trains small bakeries in labeling compliance. It felt right. Daniel moved to a different city. He found work as a sales representative for a kitchen equipment company. We texted every few weeks, nothing deep, just checking in. I invited him to Thanksgiving, but he said he was not ready. Maybe next year. I still run Flour and Stone. My customers came back. Some of them never left. A few told me they respected me for standing up for my work. Others said I had gone too far. I live with both opinions. Max the dog still sleeps at my feet while I work on orders at midnight. Alex still makes me tea when I stay up too late. The bakery smells like butter and sugar and flour dust, just like it always has. But I notice it more now. The warmth, the quiet, the fact that I get to keep doing this. And I think about my mother's letter often. She knew that recipes are not ownership. They are inheritance. But she also knew that what I built was mine, not because I invented every ingredient, but because I turned it into a life. That is the part nobody can copy. That is the part you cannot steal. There is one more thing I found in that box, a small photograph I had never seen before. My mother, pregnant, standing in a kitchen that looked nothing like ours. She was young, maybe 25. She was holding a wooden spoon and laughing. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "First bakery, closed after 6 months, but I learned how to start again." I keep that photograph on my desk now. It reminds me that failure is not the end. It is just a recipe you have not perfected yet. I still have the letter my mother wrote. I read it every few months, not for comfort, for grounding. It reminds me that the line between what we inherit and what we build is never as clear as we want it to be. My mother knew that. She failed at her first bakery and started again. Jenna took shortcuts and ended up in federal prison. Daniel chose jealousy over loyalty and lost his marriage, his reputation, and nearly his freedom. I used a regulatory complaint to destroy a competitor and discovered that my own kitchen was not perfect either. There is no clean winner in this story. There is no moment where justice arrives and everyone claps. What there is a simple truth that took me years to understand. Protecting what you build does not make you cruel, but it can make you blind to your own cracks. The FDA inspection of my bakery was the best thing that could have happened to me. It humbled me. It forced me to look at my own labels with the same scrutiny I had used on Jenna's. And it reminded me that the system we use to hold others accountable will always apply to us too. So what is the takeaway? If you run a small business, protect your intellectual property, trademark your name, document your recipes, keep records. But also know that the people closest to you can hurt you the most, not because they are evil, but because they have access. Jenna did not break into my bakery. She used my brother, and I let him in because I loved him. I still love him. We are not fully reconciled, but we are moving in that direction, one slow conversation at a time. Forgiveness is not a single decision. It is a practice. Some days I succeed. Other days I drive past the empty storefront and feel nothing but cold satisfaction. Both are real. Both are allowed. There is one more thing I want to say, and it is the hardest thing I have learned in this entire ordeal. Winning is not the same as healing. I won the legal battle. I got the restitution. I saw Jenna sentenced to 8 years. And yet I still wake up some nights with my heart racing, replaying the moment Daniel reached for my filing cabinet. The damage is not undone by a court verdict. The trust is not restored by a prison sentence. That work is slower. It is mine to do alone. If you took something from this story, I hope it is this. You can fight for what is yours without losing yourself in the fight. You can use every tool available, the FDA, the courts, the truth, and still remain human. I did not become the person I feared I might, a bitter, vengeful version of myself. I became someone who knows exactly what she is willing to protect and exactly what she is willing to lose. That is enough for now. If you want to see more stories like this, where small people take on big systems and survive with their integrity intact, consider subscribing. I will be here, writing and baking and telling the truth as I find it. One batch at a time.